welcome back everyone to webinar, the fourth and final webinar. And I think I'll get started now. We have a bit to get through, so just want to make sure that yeah, can try to finish on time. And yeah, so without further ado, I'll get going here. So webinar 4. So this is kind of building on the previous 3 webinars that we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks, and I'm just going to call this connecting the dots or connecting the ponds on the resilient water sources on the landscape. Kind of we'll go through what the planning process was for locating water developments on 3 separate range units. There's the Guy Mountain unit, the Haines Creek unit, and Raven Lake. There's water developments in place now on Guy Mountain and Haines Creek, and we're still in the planning process of Raven Lake. And I'll kind of go through, yeah, just some of the considerations for these, and what some of the thought process was around where they're located and how they work into range management. So just a quick review. So the background, we looked at the history of the project, the climate change models, what were our assumptions, the range management planning. So that was last week, using that map set and predicting those zones of use. Some of the other applications for the mapping, from rangeland health to carrying capacity to planning developments. And so you know, we kind of looked at that overall large model, and we moved it to a scale that to a range unit scale, and then we move it to a planning process, and then we use that planning process to actually implement some water developments on the landscape, or create some management recommendations, I guess, in a sense. So for planning range infrastructure, at the start of 2019, there was a workshop that assisted with identifying potential locations and identifying producers that were interested in using this planning process to improve water resources and the overall resiliency of the range unit. And this led to identifying 5 potential locations, and 3 of those locations were selected and chosen for going forward with funding applications. And one of the big benefits of this risk assessment process is that it can be combined with the range remedial measures model to support applications for land-based investment funding applications. And essentially, this planning process checks the boxes that the folks that are reviewing those funding applications are looking at, the information that they're looking for. Most of it would be covered in this risk assessment model, and so that's a benefit of using it, is that it you know, the process provides a lot of information to funding agencies. And when reviewing the 5 projects, there were a number of requirements that were identified by the steering committee and for these projects, and those requirements included the First Nations consultation be completed on the projects, identify what the water and the forage constraints are on the landscape, identify a suitable water development type that's you know, regionally applicable, and also doesn't require a whole bunch of you know, outside knowledge to construct or to plan. And the intention is that the water developments will achieve the ecological goals that are associated with range management in BC, and in addition provide water for livestock. So there's a linkage to rangeland health assessments. So rangeland health assessments were completed prior to the construction, and they were completed again last year, and they will be completed again this year in these landscapes and in the areas associated with the water developments. There is also a desire to identify what the economic, achieve these economic goals, or identify what the economics of of constructing water developments are on Crown Range. And so there's a current economic analysis that's being done by Alan Daub. And so we are working on that right now, and all that information is going to be available with the final report that comes out late this fall. Another requirement for the project was that there's not insurmountable or large legal constraints. So we are dealing with the Range Act and the Water Act, and then trying to ensure that there's not like identifying that there are constraints for sure, and if there are legal constraints to ensure that the projects fall within those. But if the project were to be identified as having something that was insurmountable or unsurmountable, then it would have been dropped. And there's also a commitment from the manager. So the producer was required to be committed to the project, and willingness to share their experiences, and also willingness to participate in a field tour. And so those were part of the requirements. Financial resources available through the LBI funding, and also the locations suitable for a field tour. And this, I'll discuss this a little bit with the Haines Creek project. It might have limited some of the areas that we could have explored just because of the suitability for field tour. But as a pilot project, we wanted to be able to share the experiences that we gained with this process. I have a bunch of acknowledgements at the end of the slide, but the district staff at the Cariboo Resource District, as well as Clayton Bradley and Lila Delary with Range Branch were quite essential in helping lay out the projects, as well as with a lot of the project management. And so I definitely want to acknowledge them now, in case hopefully I won't forget, but just in case we don't make that at the end. So the 5 areas that were identified, originally the 5 range units, were Guy Mountain, O'Keefe, Haines Creek, Raven Lake, and Scullow. And you can see they're kind of dispersed over the central part of the resource district, or the Cariboo Regional District. And part of the reason why we wanted a dispersed set of range units, just to try to capture the variety of the landscapes that are associated with range management in Cariboo. So the first project is Guy Mountain, and it's located out in the Likely Horsefly area. The landscape's characterized by a large number of cut blocks, and there's been a significant amount of harvesting that's happened over the last kind of, I guess, 5 to 8 years, or more frequently even. And there's a lot of forage that's associated with these cut blocks, and that would be the primary forage resource, as well as there's a lot of roadways and some wet meadows in that landscape. And in some of these landscapes, the roads actually provide a significant amount of forage, and so we do need to recognize that forage resource. The landscape was characterized as, in terms of water, there's little standing water, but there's a lot of ephemeral drainages and small streams in that area. And then Haines Creek is west of Alexis Creek, and this landscape is characterized by extensive lodgepole pine forests of various stages. Some of the areas, that 20 to 30-year-old lodgepole pine that's very difficult for livestock to move through. But there's a lot of roads, and there's some open fir stands, productive sedge meadow complexes, and then there's a large area of the range unit that burned recently. And so the water resources in the south part of the range are very limited to the smaller wetlands that dry down late in the season, and then the northern portion of the range is that little bit of a sliver that you see in kind of the top left. It has a lot more forage in that area, and there's some ephemeral drainages there that created suitable locations for water developments. And then the last project, or the third project, is located just past or west of Risky Creek. And again, a large portion of this landscape has burned. Overall, it's more productive than what the Haines Creek project or the Haines Creek landscape is. And there's a strategy. The strategy here was to sort of try to assist with late season management. And yeah, there's a lot of water in the northern portion of the range unit, but not quite as much in the south when we look at the potential climate impacts. So the planning process, I'll go through each individual project. I just wanted to give a quick highlight of them before moving into the details. But so the planning process was to, just like we went through the sessions, identify the water resources, identify the connected ponds, identify the resilient water bodies, and make sure that we have a strategy that's going to maintain the health of those water sources, and then identify locations on the range where there is a forage resource, and then create this process or strategy that links our water to our forage resource. And so that's kind of what is, I guess, the overall goal, or what we're trying to accomplish. That's what it is to link our resilient water to our forage. So we wanted to know where are the productive range types that have water that's easily accessible, and can water be supplied to areas that maybe don't have any water, and does the forage resource align with what's on the ground? So are the identified water resources available to livestock? And by identified, I mean those ones that we've looked at with the desktop planning exercise. And then does the primary range or the high value forage resource also connect to what we have modeled, or what we have identified in the desktop planning exercise? And so there's a lot of ground truthing that's involved with the process, going from the model to actually a water development. And just having the information in front of us on a desktop exercise doesn't necessarily mean that's our final location for our water developments. With Guy Mountain, it actually worked out that our desktop planning exercise was very closely related to, we actually, those were the locations that we used for the developments. Whereas with the Haines Creek project, we did recognize the areas that were generally that needed water, but some of the ground truthing confirmed that those locations, either there was little water there, or they weren't suitable for water developments. And so that was an important thing to recognize with the field ground truthing. So what we wanted to accomplish with the pilot projects is to have to consider the different climate adaptation scenarios. So one of the scenarios is historic grazing areas will have less traditional surface water, and by traditional I mean surface water. So less ponds, small ponds to access, and a strategy is needed to maintain the use on this range unit. So if we were to lose all the water on this range, all the existing water sources on this range unit, what is a strategy to adapt to that, or to mitigate that loss? So that's one kind of scenario that could be considered in the Cariboo Regional District. The second consideration, and so the first one is represented by Haines Creek, and then the second consideration is what if we lose some of these drier range types throughout the Cariboo, and we need to start looking elsewhere for a forage resource? And the thought being that some of the drier types are going to be short of water, and so where are range opportunities in higher elevations areas, or in wetter ecotypes? And Guy Mountain is characteristic of that wetter ecotype. And so what's involved in trying to plan water resources in those wetter types, or in those higher elevation types? And then the third consideration is, are there opportunities to move water from one area of a range unit to assist and maintain current management? And so that's what we're looking at right now with Raven Lake. And we don't have a development in place here yet, but the strategy is to try and move water about 700 meters from a reliable source to a pasture that is dominated by closed basin ponds. And so what's involved in trying to move some water from I'm not going to call it one watershed to in a sense it is one watershed to another watershed. It's all flowing into the same creek at the end of the day, but the water that's going to the point where it's being removed is different from the point where it's being taken to, I guess, in a sense. And so there's a little bit of a shift from water from one watershed to another in a sense. And that's the proposal. And so what's involved in doing this, how much does it cost? This is a strategy that's used all through the drier regions of the southern states where, you know, water's piped miles. Same with Australian range management. Piping water is not a uncommon thing to move water from one area to another in order to capture the forage resource that's somewhere and provide water from a reliable forage resource or from a reliable water area somewhere else. So planning the resilient water developments consider these different management practices, but the common theme is to remove the reliance from small closed basin systems. And so the range units that we're looking at kind of represent the spectrum of these three challenges in the Cariboo region and try to capture this variability of climate, capture the variability of water resources, forage resources, and topography associated with the complexity of range management in the Cariboo. Like I mentioned, Guy Mountain is a higher elevation area in comparison to what our sort of our classic Cariboo grasslands would be thought of. So it's very characteristic of the horsefly likely area. You know, quite productive. The understory is quite productive, especially after harvesting. And this range unit, as you can see, it's kind of constrained by the red lines on the map on the right, or the red zones and orange zones identified on the right are highly sloped landscapes. So not really suitable for livestock to move off to the west of the unit. And so really there's no reliable water up in the northern and central part of the unit. And so the strategy was to try and create water in that area where there is little in terms of standing surface water. But there is an abundant amount of water in ephemeral streams and small streams and wet meadows. Some of this water is difficult to access due to large woody debris. So as you can appreciate, if a forestry operation comes in and harvests and then leaves a buffer next to an ephemeral drainage or a small stream, those trees are no longer protected, like wind protected in essence, and are at risk to blowing down, falling down. And this creates more barriers to livestock being able to access some of these streams. And so part of the and then also just we don't necessarily want to encourage livestock to focus on these small drainages and these small streams. They're very important ecologically, and if we can create some offsite water, then that not only ensures reliable access, but it ensures just reliable water in dry years. And so the forage resource that we've identified is meadows, cut blocks, roads, and landings. And there is an ongoing question as to how is this forage resource going to shift in time. If we look at the lodgepole pine stands that are associated with the central, like with the Cariboo region, after and with most of BC, I would hazard to guess is that it's like once we get to that age of 10, 15, maybe 20 years, well, probably 15 years, those cut blocks really start to grow in, and access is limited after that amount of time in terms of livestock access. And I don't know if there's as much, if we have as much knowledge of how the forage resource is going to shift in time in some of these wetter ecotypes. And so that's one of the kind of the question. We have these water developments located in good spots with abundant forage right now, but how is that forage resource going to change over the next 15 to 25 years, which is kind of our expected lifespan of these developments, maybe more as they're maintained and hopefully that they're reliable even longer. So during the workshop and the planning phases, the producers originally identified three suitable, what they thought were suitable locations for water developments. And after field evaluation, locations, you can see on the map, they're identified 2, 3, and 4. And locations 3 and 4 were chosen as very suitable for water developments. And so, like I mentioned, the planning stage that we used at the workshop was very effective in identifying, and as well as the knowledge of the producers of their range unit was very useful in identifying suitable locations. They're approximately 3 kilometers apart, so they're kind of within that distance that livestock are going to travel to back and forth to water. So it really allows for a capture of the forage resource by spreading them out, and keep the distribution also in the northern portion of the range unit, which was one of the goals of the producers, to keep the animals in that northern portion of the range unit during the summer, so that they're not coming back home towards the haylands too soon. So after the potential locations were identified, we wanted to know, is there enough forage based on access to water to support these required the number of animal unit months. So then we went through the forage calculation table. So that's the table that we went through in webinar 3. And overall, within 1.5 kilometers of these developments, we're looking at about 145 AUMs, and that doesn't account for the 3 kilometer buffer, or I said the third development, which is we identified the 2 main locations, but then we were able to put a third development in quite cheaply, and so we went ahead and did that, and like the estimate, I'm going to do some more forage work out there this summer, but right now the estimate is that the 3 water developments will service about 400, could service about 400 AUM. So that kind of feeds into the economic analysis of the developments. The first development is a solar pump within an intake. So the intake is in the top right, that's located along the edge of the riparian zone. So it's not in the creek bed, but it's getting into the water table. And then there's a solar panel. So the solar panel in the picture in the bottom right was taken out, and when this picture was taken, there's a solar panel there, and then it pumps water to a tank. And so the option is you either store energy in a battery, or for when there's less sun, or you can store energy as water in a tank, and storing water in the tank is a little bit more reliable. And I do like to think of this as like kind of like the Cadillac design of water developments that could go onto Crown Range, and part of the field tour is to discuss these high value water developments, or where can there be potential cost savings once producers look at this, and we have a field or a conversation in the field about this development, then we'll talk about cost savings and stuff like that, or maybe this is just what people want. But some of the other considerations that were put into this project is there is a fence that goes along the riparian zone, and also there's some coarse woody debris that's put along the edge of the stream to prevent livestock they're going to be going to that trough, but then to prevent them from going into the riparian zone, there's some additional measures put in there. There's some panels around the solar system as well. The solar system's removable for hunting season, because there's a lot of public access up in that area in the fall time, so it's easily removable in the fall time, which is a good design consideration for areas that have heavy public access or recreation. And then the second development, there was between the 2 sort of identified developments, there was a water hole along the side of the road that was used for taking water to reduce dust on the road during harvesting operations. And so since it was pretty much right in the middle of the 2, we thought, well, it will help with distributing animals between those 2 water developments if we just provide a little bit of access into this water hole, and bolster up the footing a little bit with some gravel, and then they seeded it a little bit, and then they added an extra some large woody debris just along the riparian channel adjacent to that water hole to prevent livestock from going into that riparian zone and using it as a corridor. So there's a nice point access spot for them to come in and water here. And the third development is another solar system, but without the tank. And the difference in this between this and development one is there's a large sedge meadow that's associated with this development. So if you look at the schematic on the right, excuse my art skills, but if you look at the schematic, the water is flowing through that to the west through that sloping sedge meadow, but then there's also water coming in from the north through an ephemeral drainage. So in essence, this water development has two sources of water to provide a little bit more resilience. And part of the reason why we wanted to protect that sedge meadow is you can think of it acting as a giant sponge and slowly releasing water. And if livestock can get into that, it's essentially the source of water for our water development. So if livestock get in there and compact it, it reduces that ability of it to act as a sponge. And so this provides more assurance that we've protected the intake and protected our water source. So there's some wildlife friendly fencing that's put around the edge. So that's just with barbed wire with a top rail. And the other thing with this meadow is there's water hemlock that's identified within it, which is a poisonous plant for livestock. And so this also provides some assurance that they're not going to get in there if they're drawn to the water source. And so that was another reason for the design consideration. It also used an existing landing from forestry operations, so it had there's very good gravel and firm footing around that water trough for livestock, so we don't have to worry about a muddy footing for when they're accessing water. And so that's another. So overall, the producer experience for this development, the reliability of water for now and long-term management goals is very important to them. There's a succession plan in place for the kids to take over the ranch, and one of the kids is building a house out there now, and so there's this assurance of a long-term sort of reliability of water on that range unit and long-term use of that range unit was important. Difficult to assess the use of the development in years of above average rainfall. So last year and the year before, we had above average rainfall, and in that unit, when that happens, there's water, in ditches, there's small ponds where the water is accumulating. There's small scoop outs where the water is accumulated along the edge of the roads, and so in years of above average moisture, it's difficult to assess how much the animals are using these developments, but I'm hoping we're going to get a little bit better idea of that this year. And they also had predator issues up there last year as well. So there are wolves probably more frequently there's wolves in these higher elevation range units than there are in the grassland systems. And so we need to consider the predator issues when investing in water developments in these areas. So the second project is Haines Creek. So that's out west of Alexis Creek. The first thing to mention, this is a huge, an enormous rate, well over 20,000 hectares. And so this is a large land base that we're looking at. And you can kind of get that idea. Each one of those circles is each one of the solid hash marked circles or more solid hashed circles is a 700 hectare area, and then the 3 kilometer hash circle is a 2,800 hectare area. So there's it's an enormous area of it's just a large range unit. And so again, characterized by the burn, open fir forests, few open meadows. All the red in the forage category map are non-sufficiently and non-productive. The pink is non-sufficiently restocked cut blocks, and so it's quite a dry landscape where with silviculture going in and planting lodgepole pine after harvesting. There's lots of areas that are considered not sufficiently restocked, which for livestock isn't the end of the world, because then that just means less trees to get in the way of grazing. And so it's important forage. Those areas can be important forage and provide quite a bit of forage for livestock. The original thought, since it's such a large unit, was to assess these any of the meadows or smaller wetlands throughout the central and northern portion of the range unit, and try and connect the central and northern portion to the southern parts of the range unit. And so the map on the far right, you can see I have some solid circles that are put in there. Those are all small ponds under 2 hectares that we wanted to look at to determine if we could find any areas that had connected water. So they're smaller ponds, but if they're connected, then potentially they're suitable for development. And so that was kind of the strategy originally moving out here or going out here, was to look at these, to find connected ponds to the central and kind of well, through the central portion of the range unit. And was there water? Yes, there's these sedge meadows that have high potential, and we had our Connie's water sniffing dog with us, Turbo, and he was great at finding water sources. The meadows, so we had a bit of a strategy to develop 3 meadows in this through this complex, or through this southern part of the range unit. In 2020 in the springtime, 2020 or 2019 in the springtime, the road washed out that accesses this southern portion of the unit. And so that kind of changed our thoughts around one of the project requirements is accessible for a field tour. And so if we're having issues with access to this area, we thought that possibly it's not the best to highlight this in terms of a pilot project. The water development that Turbo was standing in there was completely underwater in the spring last year, and so it would have been too difficult to do any construction in there, and so the strategy changed to identifying the portion of the range unit in this northern sliver, so that there's a little sliver on the top left-hand corner of the map, and that has no water, but there's some very suitable ephemeral drainages and springs. And so the strategy moved to developing 2 springs in this area and provide access to that northern sliver of the range unit, which generally hasn't been used over the past few years because of the lack of water. And it's right along the highway, so it made it very suitable for a field tour. And so the forage and water resource, so the proposal or the proposed use from the tenure holder is 60 animal units for 4 to 6 weeks, so approximately 80 AUMs in the fall. And the available forage is 377 AUMs. So we have lots of forage. There's a lot of forage associated with the recent burned area, and then our water requirement. We can calculate our water requirement off of that. It's about might be actually a little bit greater than that. Would be at 60 animal units. It's 36,000. So at 80 is at 42,000 liters. And so these are much simpler developments. They're gravity fed, very different from the Guy Mountain project where we had a more of a complex solar system put in. And so we just have an intake that gravity feeds a trough, and the trough has a float on it to control water flow coming in, and also the troughs have the ability to be connected in series. So there's the option to connect another trough to this existing trough with a pipeline is there for the producer if it's determined that they require water further down, or if 1 trough or 2 troughs isn't enough for the number of animals on the unit. It allows for some flexibility in terms of adding another trough to the system. And this intake is about 100 meters, maybe a little bit more away from the trough, and there wasn't any additional work put around to protect it. There may be some additional woody debris that gets placed around it, just to limit any livestock from going in there. But generally, it's kind of the trough is well away from the riparian zone here, and the idea is that the livestock are going to focus on that. And there's also it was placed on a little elevated knoll in a sense with some gravel placed around it, so the trough is elevated with good drainage around the edge of it to ensure proper footing. And the second development It's very similar design. The intake was a little bit closer to where the trough location was. So just some posts were put around and some rock was put around the intake just to prevent livestock from going and bumping it or rubbing against it or whatnot. And in the same situation, the trough float controls the flow, and there's an ability to add. This landscape is a little bit more steeper than where the first trough was located, and so but there's an ability to add additional troughs through a gravity-fed system here if needed. So for the producer, it allows access to historic range that has not been recently used because of a lack of water. It allows access to this abundant forage supply that's associated with the recently burned areas as well as the open fir forests. So that's where the majority of the forage is located in this area, and provides additional management tool if the water resources in the southern portion of the range are further stressed with climate change. So if portions of that southern unit become unusable, there's some extra AUMs that are available in that northern portion of the range. So the third project is located near Risky Creek, just west of Williams Lake. Again, similar landscape to that portion of Haines Creek, except there is more open fir. It's a bit more productive, and there's a much larger portion that's been burned. And the focus of this strategy is where the arrow on the far right is pointing, is kind of that southwest boundary of the unit. And that's where the focus of this strategy is, because again, it's a very large range unit, and the producers want the animals to stay north for the most part, but then there's a pasture on the southwest that is used for 2 weeks in the fall time, and it is characterized by closed basin ponds, and so trying to provide some water there allows them to maintain current management. So there's an abundant amount of forage with the burn and also with the open fir forests, and a very detailed forage inventory was done just south in the range just south of here in 2015, and so that allowed us to create this much more complex forage map than what we have with other range units, and get a better idea of estimating forage based on that previous sampling that was done just south of here. And again, my field notebook sketch. So this is very preliminary, but this is the overall strategy is to take water from where the confluence of these two drainages are at, where the lower or the middle arrow is, I guess, and move water across this fence boundary to this pasture where it's associated with the right arrow. And so we have we need some sort of a pumping system, either solar, hydraulic pump, possibly a generator pump, depending. We need water for 2 weeks. We don't need water for an entire grazing season. So the strategy around the pumping system has a little bit more flexibility. And then we either need to store water in a tank or have a series of troughs that go down through this pasture in order to supplement the water that's in the closed basin ponds. And so again, this is in the works, this project, or the layout. The layout's actually, we're going to do that next week, and also do some riparian health assessments and things like that in this area next week. And so the current location, or the proposed location, is in a intermittent stream, or it was flowing in the fall time, but last year we had a high moisture, so it's debatable whether this is a perennial stream, but it's definitely a higher intermittent stream. And then it would take the water to this elevated plateau and have gravity-fed troughs down into that basin where those closed basin ponds are, or even just leave the troughs up here and allow the livestock to come up to access water and maybe take some of the pressure off of those closed basin ponds. The stream has a number of points for livestock access, so part of the strategy is to protect this stream. You can see from the photo on the left that there's some unimpeded access kind of along the edge, which isn't the end of the world if it's point access, but to limit that is definitely part of the strategy. This stream is also burned. It was burned heavily, and so some of the large debris is now falling down, and so that's going to actually prevent some access some livestock access at this point as well. So limiting access shouldn't be that difficult here. So our next steps, an economic analysis of the benefits of the water development. We're going to continue to do rangeland health assessments, forage production estimates, gather more producer experiences, and then complete field tours and a workshop with producers in September of this year. Darren, I'm just going to flip through these quick. Darren's up next. I'm not going to forget you today. I just wanted to quickly go through the acknowledgements and the steering committee, David Zernheld, Duncan Barnett with the Cariboo Cattlemen's Association, Nicole Pressey, Lisa Zabek with BC Ministry of Agriculture, Foods and Fisheries, Clayton, Bradley, Lila Delury, Morgan Mueller, and Trish Nairn with the BC Ministry of Forests and Range, and Emily McNair with Climate Action Initiative BC, and Connie with Flynn Road out of Alexis Creek as well. Was essential with like the layout and like all logistics going on with that project because it's just so far away from I won't say civilization, but it's so far away from well, it's far away from services. And then we won't forget Turbo, the super dog. I'm sure Connie will appreciate an honorable mention for Turbo. Funding for the projects was through the Climate Agriculture Initiative BC, and funding for the water development installations was through Flynn Road's Land-Based Investment Fund, and project admin and outreach support through Cariboo Cattlemen's Association, and all the people mentioned were also involved in the contract management and logistics, and so yeah, just a big thank you to all of them for assisting. Darren, I'm going to pass it over to you. The accessing the maps is possible for the Cariboo Regional District. We have the maps are accessible and the data is usable. For the rest of the province, we're still in the works of getting a data sharing agreement in place. If there are map requests, they can be sent to me, and I'll provide my contact information at the end of after Darren's done.
Okay, so it's probably appropriate anyways, because this is usually part of the show where people's eyes start to glaze over anyways when you start talking about GIS and data. So it's certainly not as exciting as identifying plants and getting your sun on your head and muck on your boots. But like death and taxes, data is definitely inevitable. So I'll keep the torture brief. Data doesn't look the same to everyone. Obviously, for people who've worked with data, one person's trash is another person's treasure as far as data goes. And it's not only because people have these varying degrees of comfort with data, but it's more really because we have such diverse ways of describing data now. Like not everything needs to be mapped. Just because we can map it doesn't mean we have to map it. Sometimes a table of figures that reports numbers or percentages, maybe that's the deliverable. And sometimes something needs to be mapped because where it is in space and its proximity to other things is important. And often, neither a map or a table needs to be done. Often now, handheld devices and tablets, they're becoming more accessible and becoming easier to use, and increasingly end users only want the digital data so they can upload to their application of choice, take it to the field. Long-winded way of saying when it comes to data, one size doesn't fit all. But it's easy to see why sometimes it can be overwhelming. There's no doubt about that. Next slide there, Andrew. So data comes to us in many, many, many ways. It can be at different scales, different resolutions, different file formats, different levels of intelligence, different accuracies, different seasons, and it may even require different interpretation methods. So for example, we could collect the area of a particular pond using GPS and drone imagery and satellite imagery and from trimmed digital water and digitized from a paper map. And I'd bet my house that none of these will result in the same area or the same shape. So even though all these methods collected the same information about the same feature, they're all different. So for instance, GPS is way more accurate at digitizing off a map, but you could digitize 50 maps to every pond you could GPS. Drone imagery is way more accurate than satellite imagery, but the most appropriate satellite imagery doesn't cost a dime. And drones will cost you a minimum of $2 grand to get in the game. Not to mention the time invested in learning how to fly it, the downtime associated with battery changes. Physically going to the field and identifying and measuring the amount of forage in a range unit is undoubtedly way more accurate than calculating with a program or computer model, but who could live that long to do that? The real culprit here is the number of file formats on which all this data all these data slices are collected and stored in. That's really what the culprit is here. Many of them need to be downloaded. They need to be corrected for projections or coordinate systems or file formats, entered by key punch, or they need to be digitized. So the very thing really that makes present day data collection a dream come true also makes it somebody's biggest nightmare. Next slide there, Andrew. So if any of you are Newfoundlanders or grew up somewhere near an ocean, I don't need to tell you what this is. For those of you who are raised on the prairies like me, this is a lobster trap. And the beauty of a lobster trap is in the design of it. It's really super simple. It's super easy for the lobsters to get into the trap, but they can't get out once they're in. They're stuck. Far too often, and much of the time completely accidental to nobody's fault, data collection falls into this lobster trap kind of paradigm. We have so many ways to collect data and download data, analyze data, and this provides us the luxury of collecting all this data that we feel comfortable, but it also provides the often unanticipated and very often inconvenient situation where we can't get the data out. So we've got all this data in a big soup and we can't make any sense of it. And it's not necessarily impossible to get out, but sometimes it requires software or requires more analysis to get into the format that we can use it. So I know all that sounds really doom and gloom, but I'm here to tell you that it's not doom and gloom when it comes to data. Data lobster traps are really completely avoidable. There's no doubt about it. The solution is one of the most important parts of working with evidence-based decision-driven projects like the project that Andrew's been talking about, and that's communication with the end user. If you want to flip slide there, Andrew. So it begins and ends with the end user. The best system or model or methodology doesn't matter if the end user can't use it, or worse, if they won't use it. So it's about understanding how the data will be used and who will use it and what technology is needed to use it. And does it even need to be technology at all? How can the data be disseminated to the most people in the most efficient manner that doesn't waste the data user or the data provider's time? So where will the data be stored? Who has access to it? What formats can the data be provided to the end user in? All of these things are questions that sort of need to be sorted out and talked about ahead of time before all of our data goes into this lobster trap. Once the end users are identified and the best way for them to ingest that data is discovered, then it only requires reverse engineering to create the best way to collect and ingest and analyze and view the data. So this slide just is a really simple graphic to sort of depicts the different ways that data can be provided to end users, whether you're using a desktop computer, whether you're using a cell phone, a tablet in the field, or whether you're just using paper maps. It doesn't matter. Depending on the cost, depending on your file storage capacity, your portability, your technical expertise, and most importantly, industry standards, there are paths that are more efficient and elegant than others. So it comes down to finding the most efficient way to collect and analyze and store, retrieve, report, and finally disseminate this data, but it needs to be accomplished within some sort of established data governance. So this means that we need to establish some sort of consistent repository where the data sits and resides, how updates and edits are applied to that data, and then the maintenance of the data. So what's the latest edits rather than feeding people old data, or the maintenance of topology and versioning. And finally, then establishing a very clear path to accessing that data for all the end users. So really, if you take anything away from this thing that I've been rambling about at 100 miles an hour, is this: it's important that all the stakeholders spend more time making decisions with the data rather than making decisions about the data. So the more effort that's put on the front end to have this data governance and have all of these things sorted out, the easier it is for people to access the data. So it can come in a whole bunch of different ways. It can come in GIS format. It can come in PDFs, geo-corrected PDFs. It can come in KML that can be put into Google Earth. It can come in shape files. There's lots of different methods and formats for the data to come to the end users. It's just establishing who wants what and how to store it. There, done. Less than 10 minutes, I think.
So the maps are, thank you, Darren. And the maps are available. The original maps are available from the Climate Agriculture Initiative website. And for the Cariboo Regional District, we do have some, I guess, updated maps and updated layers available for use. And the best way to get the updated maps would be to flip me an email. for those of you that know how to get a hold of me, just, yeah, it's andrewpantel@gmail.com, and you could just send a request with the specific range unit. And then if it's outside of the Cariboo Regional District, we're working on a data sharing agreement, because those maps and that project is done out through another project, essentially. So anyway, I'll leave it at that for the map layers. And if there's any questions about the projects, or the 3 projects that we discussed, or any other questions for Darren around accessing mapping layers, I'm available to stick around here for a little while longer as well. And so if people want to stay online for a little while after 10:30, I think that's fine. Sean, right?
Oh, that sounds great. So yes, time for questions, and a reminder, just like last time, you can either pop them in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. You can ask your questions, or if you have comments or just, further experience to add, this would be a great time for that as well. For those that are really interested in this topic, as Andrew mentioned, there will be a field day planned for September. And Andrew, maybe just at the closing, you can just give a little bit more information about that. And Darren has to leave, but thank you so much, Darren, for joining us. And I know you got to go move on to another topic, important topic, salmon. But yeah, thanks again for joining and providing the insights to GIS and giving the excellent explanations you have for GIS and data management.
No problem.
Thanks, Darren.
Gee, thanks, Sean. Okay, yep, we'll talk to you soon.
While we give people a minute to formulate their questions or their reflections, Andrew, do you want to just speak to the field day and what that might look like and how people could potentially be involved, who those will be for?
Sure. So the details of the field day aren't finalized yet. It will likely happen within the last 2 weeks of September, and it will be based. It'll be a field tour involving going to look at the water developments in Guy Mountain and Alexis Creek. Right now, the intention is to have 2 sessions, so one for producers west of Williams Lake and one for producers east of Williams Lake, where people can attend both. Yeah, and the workshop will involve going through a little bit more what's involved with the sampling plan for calculating forage, and looking at the methods used for destructive sampling, for like what we call clipping studies, to help determine forage on the landscape. And yeah, there'll be lots of conversation around water development, construction methods, and yeah, looking forward to the field tour of the sites. And there'll be a note that comes out from the Cariboo Cattlemen's Association that will, if you want to be on, if you want more information about how to get on the mailing list, or how to be informed when this field tour is happening again, just flip me an email.
We do have a comment in the chat from Clayton. Oh, and we do now have our first question. Thank you. So the question is, do the developments have to be winterized in the fall? Could you explain a little bit more about this?
Yes. So both projects that are in the ground, they do have to be winterized in the fall. And so generally it just involves draining for the gravity fed system. It just involves draining the tanks, draining the lines that feed to the gravity system. And that is the requirement of the producer is required as part of the maintenance of them, to ensure that those systems are drained in the fall time. For the solar system, the panels have to be taken down, and the pump, the submersible pump that's in the intake, needs to be taken out, and just partly to ensure they don't get stolen, but then also just to just so that they're not damaged during the winter by winter weather. And so those are taken to the producer, stores those and keeps them at the ranch, and then reinstalls everything in the spring. And taking things out for the solar systems is about an hour at each site, and putting them back in is about an hour at each site. And then same with the draining the lines for the gravity system. It doesn't take very long at all, so less than an hour, and then it's more just getting up and accessing the sites.
Great, thanks for that answer. Clayton, I'm going to give you a chance to unmute yourself here in a second, but I'm going to let Andrew answer one more question first. What is the life expectancy of some of these water developments?
For the economic analysis, what we are looking at is a life expectancy of 20 to 25 years for the panels and the pumps. Actually, Clayton might have a better idea, or might even be able to provide some further information on those, on the solar systems. The troughs, in essence, are I would think they can withstand, geological time, possibly, barring a glacier. But they're very well built troughs, and so the intakes and the troughs themselves don't require a whole lot of maintenance, other than just the winter maintenance. The intakes, there might be a little bit of maintenance associated with cleaning them out. However, the life expectancy is sort of in that how we're doing the economic analysis is based on a 25-year life expectancy.
Great. Okay, and Clayton, do you want to unmute yourself now?
I just wanted to echo my comment in the chat there, and thank Andrew and Darren for the work that they've put into this project. It's been, I don't know, Andrew, I think at least 4 years here since the beginning, and yeah, I think you've come up with a really great planning tool here, considering the changes that we're likely to see in the coming years and decades. And I just think it's a really good tool, and I really look forward to using it more with the range program staff across the province. And yeah, who knows where it'll go from here. And I enjoy working with you, and hope to keep looking at how we can continue to do things better and manage the rangeland and the resource the best way we can.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing those comments, Clayton. Also, we do have a suggestion in the that was sent to us by chat around putting together a half-hour to 1 hour overview that captures the essence of the project, so that information could be shared with a broader audience, and hopefully stimulate some projects in other areas of the province. Andrew, I don't want to answer for you whether or not that's a possibility, so maybe I'll pass that one to you. But do you see that as something that could fit into sort of the next steps for this project?
It's definitely in the next steps for the overall provincial project, because the concern is that this is a lot of information to digest, and we need to provide it in a more succinct format in order to just get the information out there better. So the intent is to create some succinct fact sheets, as well as a more succinct presentation to go along with those fact sheets, and that is in the works. And so I appreciate hearing the comment that there's value in that.
Great. Well, that wraps up our questions that we have. So I think we can sign off. So Andrew, do you want to just give a final wrap up? And thanks again. It's been a really excellent 4 sessions, and I, for one, have learned a lot. But so have the others that have joined. A lot of really positive feedback so far.
Well, I just thank you everyone for participating, and as always, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be in the Cariboo next week, and then also I'll be coming through Rocky Mountain Resource District, Selkirk, and likely 100 Mile House this summer. And so, yeah, you can save your questions until then, or please don't hesitate to email. And again, it's andrewpantel@gmail.com. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for joining us.